Welcome to this video about the first article of the course, Development of Personal Relationships. In these videos I'm gonna summarize the literature that we have to learn, the articles and the chapters. I'm gonna see how far I come, so no promises, but thank you for watching. The first article is called The Beginning of Peer Relations. Peer relations begin in the very first weeks of life. Infants start to notice each other and respond when the other cries or coos. When a baby approaches 1 year, they start to communicate and even forge friendships. These early beginnings are rarely incorporated into research of older children's peer relations, however. This article discusses some theoretical issues of peer relation research in developmental science. There are some central issues that this article talks about. First, what is the social meaning of early peer relations? The answer to this depends on if you consider nonverbal interaction as social. If you assume it is, then the peer relations between infants is very different from all other stages of life. This leads to more questions like, at what age do nonverbal behaviors then meet the criteria for social interaction? How do these behaviors resemble future social interactions? And when are distinct relationships formed? The second central issue pertains to the question, what are the developmental origins of early peer relations? Does infant interaction reflect our ability to relate to other humans, the way we see it throughout childhood and adulthood? Is relating to others as a baby a prerequisite for peer relations? How do one's early relationships predict their future socializing? And then the last question, are early peer relations consequential for later development? Or in other words, is forming relationships with others as an infant related to one's later development? Are biological and social factors that influence early peer relations still of importance later on? Longitudinal methods would be helpful to explore this. Friendships are much harder to research than family relations, since family memberships remain relatively stable over time in most cases, but children rapidly create and lose peer relations. There are a couple of theoretical considerations and some classical developmental theories. The first theory is the psychoanalytic theory. This theory emphasizes the emotional limitations of infants. It has no expectation that infants' peer relations are significant for further development. Counter-evidence was presented by Anna Freud, who observed that emotionally significant peer relations in very young children could still be very strong, even when these children were never able to form a parental bond. The second theory is the evolutionary theory. These theories of evolution, they focus on the conveyance of inherited characteristics from one generation to the next. They look at children's peer relations through the discipline of human ethology, or the study of human behavior. In this theory, the peer relations of infants is seen as somewhat unnatural. It is argued that during the time where humans were still hunters and gatherers, these relations probably wouldn't even have formed, because there wasn't much opportunity to do so. A study with monkeys shows that being together with peers provides a protective function in social development. It is beneficial as long as the young monkeys also experience other types of relations, not just peers. The ones that were exclusively put with peers developed some undesirable traits like poor self-regulation. The next theory that looks at this is attachment theory. Within attachment theory, there is the assumption that infants are immersed in their relationship with their parents and only later on turn their attention to people their age. Bowlby proposed that through evolution we have a tendency to form a bond with a primary caregiver which is the more important bond, more important than all the others. Then we have the social learning theory. In this theory, parents were seen as important influences on their children's social development through their modeling and social reinforcement. Attachment is something you learn, the theory says. This theory does not talk about young peer relations a lot, besides saying that in the first 2 years of life you just learn by imitating others. Then we have the cognitive developmental theory. Piaget is an important name in this theory, and he argues that peer influences begin to operate only later in childhood. He depicts infancy as an individual discovery of the world, where even parental influences are not yet important. According to him, young children are very limited in their cognition and are still quite egocentric, which constrains the quality and quantity of their relations. Other theorists within this view, they also did not pay a lot of attention to the possible importance of early relationships. And lastly, we talk about the behavioral genetics theory. Some stronger versions of the behavioral genetic theories downplay the contribution of parents, with one of those theories emphasizing the role of peers. None of the theories that focus on the interplay between genes and environment really focus on peer influence in particular. And I also did not put anything on the slide for this because there's not much known about it. There are some major developmental theories, and they basically hold these 3 thoughts. An infant's capacity for true social interaction is very limited. Their ability to engage in peer relations develops later in childhood, and later peer relations are more important for development than early ones. And even though these thoughts are in place, a few theorists argue that infants are already more active in social interactions than we think. Their social systems surely are different than the ones later in life, but they are there. This is called the social systems approach, and it emphasizes the social nature of infants, their ability to engage in multiple relationships, and the fact that they are part of complex social networks, like families. It has an evolutionary basis and shows that a social system model fits better than Bowlby's monotropic idea of just one primary caretaker. Oh, sorry, I forgot to get these on the screen. Here you can see them again. With these images I try to represent the blue box as the infant, and then there on the left side the monotropic thing that Bowlby proposed with one caretaker, one really strong bond, and then on the right side what the social systems approach says, the multiple bonds with multiple people, the social system. So there are several questions that still need to be answered, and the article tries to discuss these questions according to findings in research. This is under the heading methods and measures, but in my opinion they didn't really talk a lot about actual methods and measures. If you read the article, you might agree with me. So the question, are infants capable of true social interaction? Evidence suggests that the capacity for peer interaction is present already in the first months of life. It's mostly nonverbal though. Research has shown that peer interaction succeeds when it is flexible and creative and not too predictable and repetitive. The second question is, do infants' peer interactions resemble social interactions at an older age? There are 3 forms of social interaction that are commonly studied in childhood, one being pro-social exchanges, so things like working together and sharing. Infants respond to each other's cries, which is found to not be coincidental. By their first birthday, they participate in sharing, voluntary sharing. The second social interaction that's often studied is social conflict. Like conflicts over toys emerge in the last quarter of the first year. Infants tend to avoid conflict. Shortly before the first birthday, physical acts of force come into play, and individual differences in this can of course be very huge. And the last, social influence. Things like learning and learning to conform to. Some limitations still play an important role in this form of social interaction. The third question is, do infants and toddlers form unique peer relationships? In short, the answer to this is yes, they do kind of. Even at 6 months of age, members of dyads are similar to each other, and the principle of homophily, or the preference for people like oneself, is even found. Evidence and counter-evidence was found for the idea that social skills first emerge between a mother, or in some studies an adult in general, and a child, and that these are a prerequisite for the forming of skills with peers. A mother has many influences on early peer relations, depending on the quality of their attachment. However, the evidence for a clear link between this attachment and early peer relations is not conclusive. A large study found that marital conflict between the parents had a negative impact on the child's peer relations, especially when the child was insecurely attached. And sibling relationships seem to be of important influence on peer relations of older children more than younger children. So older children are influenced more by their siblings' relationships. A child's temperament has been found to influence their interaction with peers, and there have been few studies into cognition and language. However, it was found that understanding of emotion and intentions was associated with pro-social behavior and proactive aggression, respectively. Some key features of interaction are found cross-culturally, but differences in parental influences also changes with the culture. The influence of genes is somewhat hard to discover, since the twin study would perhaps not completely work in this particular situation, since the kids would not only be age mates but also siblings, and there are no sex differences found before the second birthday, but between 2 and 4 years old, these start to emerge. So, some new directions that the article refers to is that despite methodological complexity, it is worth to put more effort into this matter. Early peer relations should be studied more directly in an experimental and natural setting if we want to understand the processes that underlie social development. Several fundamental questions that need to be answered are: what cognitive and learning mechanisms underlie interaction with peers? When do peer relations become intentional, and what intentions do young peers have? When do infants attain intersubjectivity with peers? So intersubjectivity has the meaning of communication. So when do infants communicate with each other? And when do toddlers begin to identify social groups? Literature clearly demonstrates that even the earliest interaction of infants have a social meaning. Social capacities clearly emerge in the first years of life. There is no clear evidence that the relationship with the mother is of any influence on peer relations. Rather, the social systems approach suggests that the skills in these two types of relationships develops more or less parallel to each other. Longitudinal research shows that individual variations in behavior predict later aggression and social competence, and much more information is needed into the transitions between types of interaction. Well, that was the first article summarized. I wanted to go to the next slide, but it's already the next article that I did. I know I made some little mistakes here and there, not being on time with the slides and stuff like that, but I'm going to try to perfect that over the course of doing these more often. If you have any feedback, please let me know, especially content-wise, if I skipped something that definitely should be in there, or if I should be more precise or more detailed. I did summarize the next 4 after this as well, so I won't change too much about that, but especially for in the future, it's handy. And thank you for watching.